Anti-MAGA controversy continues. Now, Chance the Rapper is actually apologizing for defending the rapper after Trump thanked Chance, all right? So basically, if you don't remember, Kanye tweeted his support for Donald Trump. He tweeted out a MAGA hat that was signed, and he said that they both have dragon energy.
And he hated on Obama.
Yeah. Now, he did hate on Obama. Now, Chance the Rapper tweeted out that, black people don't have to be Democrats. Then Donald J. Trump responded, Kanye West has performed a great service to the black community. Big things are happening and eyes are being opened for the first time in decades. I want to continue reading this tweet, but my biggest issue with Trump, aside from the whole bigotry and BS that he spews, is that he doesn't know what proper nouns are. Decades does not need to be capitalized. All right, continue. Legacy stuff, again, but thank you also to Chance and Dr. Daryl Scott. They really get it. Lowest black and Hispanic unemployment in history.
You just tag that in there.
He literally just named all the black people he knows. That's what he did in that tweet. He's like, these are the 3 black people that like me, or that I think like me. So this is my black friend that I can now associate myself with, so that when you call me a racist, I can bring up their names. That's essentially what he's doing in this tweet. Now, Chance retweeted Trump's thanks with the comment, nah, that ain't it, yo, followed by a longer apologetic message that concluded, we have to talk honestly about what is happening and has been happening in this country, and we have to challenge those who are responsible, as well as those who are giving them a pass. If that happens to include someone I love, someone who is my brother in Christ, and someone who I believe does really want to do what is right, it's not my job to defend or protect him. It's my job to pick up the phone and talk to him about it. Now, someone did actually pick up the phone and talk to Kanye about it, and that person is John Legend. So he texted Kanye after this whole tweet debacle, and he says, hey, it's JL. I hope you'll reconsider aligning yourself with Trump. You're way too powerful and influential to endorse who he is and what he stands for. As you know, what you say really means something to your fans. They are loyal to you and respect your opinion. So many people who love you feel so betrayed right now because they know the harm that Trump's policies cause, especially to people of color. Don't let this be part of your legacy. You're the greatest artist of our generation. Kanye responds, I love you, John, and I appreciate your thoughts. You bringing up my fans or my legacy is a tactic based on fear used to manipulate my free thought. And then he posted this to Twitter, and John Legend responded saying, think freely, think with empathy and context too. Your words and actions have consequences. Much love. And since you're posting text, let me add that I have a new single out, which is the best response ever. Chance also talked about the fact that he wouldn't support a lot of Trump's policies and a lot of things that he was saying because Ivanka, Donald Trump Jr. also appreciated what they perceived as support. And Donald Trump Jr. Thanked Chance and wrote this tweet. It's always incredible to watch a cultural shift happen in real time. I respect those willing to take the lead, breaking with convention. That takes guts. Though there's a better word for it, 2 basketballs.
Because that's not stereotypical racist at all.
Yeah. I know what he was trying to say cojones. Which is sexist in itself, right? But also,
I'm sorry, I don't know Trump speak.
Yeah.
Emojis.
Right? It was sexist and racist at the same time, all in 140 characters.
That's sadly impressive. I was just gonna say, yeah.
What do you guys think about this whole controversy?
I'm so angry. I get so angry. So first of all, people of color that were tweeting Kanye and saying, finally, black people waking up. It's so funny to me to see racist white people love a good sellout. And they enjoy to hear somebody support their agenda that states that people of color are less than, they're lazy, they don't want to work, they don't want to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. It's so easy to tell somebody to pull themselves up by the bootstraps when you are wearing steel boots with iron straps and you're telling somebody with no shoes on to pull themselves up. So it just pisses me off. I wonder what did these white people who love Kanye now said about Kanye when he did his Taylor Swift little thing. I guarantee you if you go back and look at the tweets.
Or look at when he talked talked about Bush.
Oh no, when he said, well, now the meme is reversed. Now Kanye doesn't like black people. But my greater point is, because that's why I hate celebrity culture and I don't want to belong to it. Why do we care what Kanye West thinks so much? Kanye West is so disconnected. He's tweeting about how much he loves his Tesla. He's tweeting this house saying, do I look like I'm in the sunken place? While there are people out there who don't have food for their children, they don't have health care, and you think that Kanye West can relate to what you're going through? He has any concept of what it is to be in the struggle right now. And that is what bothers me the most. Kanye West is not my leader. People of color have to stop assuming leadership because they have fame, and we have to rebuke it when they do that. Just because someone of color is famous and makes a statement about politics does not make them a reflection of all people of color. This one right here has a PhD. Why is Kanye West speaking on behalf of her?
Yeah, I've never had or thought Kanye speaking on behalf of me.
Exactly.
I will say that I agree with your point around the cult around celebrities, the culture that we have around it. And actually, John Legend and Bree Newsome had some really poignant tweets about this. And that was my favorite part, was them asking the question of, why can't we separate the artist from the way that we uphold them? Or why do we expect the artist to have this genius message component? That's actually a lot to expect the artist to speak beyond what the art that they've expressed, and to have a political framework that we want to hold on to and engage. And I think what's worth noting, though, is that John Legend did affirm that for Kanye. He said, "You're the greatest artist of our generation." And I think this is what Kanye's been getting. So he's buying into the hype. I mean, and also buying into the hype of the fact that he is allegedly the person who is filterless. He's the free thinker. He's the one in 2005 that called out George W. Bush on the telethon, said George Bush doesn't like black people. But what I think he actually is consistently provocative. I don't think he's consistent in being a truth teller. I don't think he's a consistent genius. I don't think he's a consistent free thinker. I think he constantly wants to be provocative to get a response from folks, and that's a very clear way for him to maintain his relevancy in the press. I mean, marrying one of the Kardashians is a clear pathway towards that. And why he sees any sort of connection through the dragon energy of Trump is because they both are that. They're both showmen, they're showboaters, and what they're really peddling is their persona. And they're peddling nothing else, and everything beyond that is quite empty. And I'm sorry I went on this Kanye rant, but I too feel really squirmish when we uphold artists and celebrities to this pedestal where they have to be immaculate too. Because first of all, I don't get my politics from people who have produced singles or produce art. I inform myself, I educate myself about what an issue is, what the policy is about. I read the policies. And I think that's been the problem of why our democracy is at a point where it becomes in jeopardy, is because we don't inform ourselves, we don't self-educate, we rely on others, and especially our obsession with celebrity culture, we rely on those folks to do the work. And I just want to add, I said this before, I don't want to bash on Kanye because I actually feel bad for him. I know there was this huge tailspin after his mother passed away from a really fluke plastic surgery accident in, I believe, 2007. And there was just this descending to the sunken place. And so, and I mean, more comments on Chance as well, because I think he didn't know what he was getting into. And I do agree that all black folks don't have to be Democrats, but to put in the context of trying to defend Kanye.
And Trump.
Exactly. Is just not the best response.
I think you make a really good point, right? I mean, I think it makes sense that he would align himself, one, to be provocative, and both are like megalomaniacs, right? And that's why he sees the dragon energy probably in Trump as well. I do think, though, that I agree with you to some extent. I agree with both of you to some extent that we do have a weird, sick culture that really idolizes these. We literally call them idols, these celebrities, right? And we take what they say as a tenet to live our lives, right? What they eat, how they work out, how they vote, how they do everything, right? What they wear, down to like, what kind of sex they have, whatever it is. Like, we pay attention to so closely and want to emulate so much of it. And I do think that there is something very perverse about that. But the flip side of that is like, okay, we're in this society now, and if you are an artist with that platform, you need to recognize that and have accountability in what you say and how you say it.
Well, I will add too, there are celebrities out there who have recognized that and understood that they have a platform where they can amplify messages that need to be channeled out to a bigger audience. And I'll shout out Rosario Dawson and Matt McGorry, who posted posted such an amazing Medium article about standing up against NYPD abuse of power and LAPD abuse of power as well. So there are folks that are doing that, but they also recognize that they are part of the movement. They don't represent the movement. And that's what I really love about the kind of activism work and organizing they do. I mean, Matt literally went to New York and stood in protest and got arrested.
Yeah, he did. But you know what, also, I don't believe the hype, though. A lot of people are trying to sell product. Kanye has an album coming out. A few years ago, Kanye was talking about the systemic racism that would not allow him to do what he wanted to do with his shoe company. Look at that Sway interview and how black people are not allowed to go to these limits. And now it's, you can do whatever you want to do because he got the shoes. I think a lot of them, Shania Twain, whose tour wasn't doing that well, and all of a sudden said she would have voted for Trump. They're looking at the Roseanne effect. We were talking about Roseanne. Roseanne is a pro-Trump supporter, did her TV show, 18 million people watched. They're trying to sell albums. Hey, you don't know what their motivation is. And while you're falling for the okie doke, they are living their best lives, you know?
Yeah. What you just watched was one of the videos that we do today, but we actually do a whole 2-hour show every single day. It's a podcast. You could watch it in video or listen to it as audio. You can download it, you can stream it, and you get it completely ad-free if you could become a member of the Young Turks. tytnetwork.com/join.